I'm Priscilla Lawrence, the Executive Director of the Historic New Orleans Collection, and it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome you here this morning to the Williams Research Center. We are so happy to collaborate on this symposium in this historic time. And for those of you that are joining us on the live streaming broadcast, we welcome you as well. For 20 years, the Oxford American has been exploring Southern culture, literature, history, music, and art. And for nearly 50 years, the Historic New Orleans Collection has been doing much the same. As a museum, research center, and publisher, the collection is dedicated to preserving the history and culture of the Gulf South. Here in our research center, we house more than 1 million items that illustrate the fascinating and multicultural history of this area. The holdings form the foundation of our museum exhibitions and our original publications, and they are available to you. I invite you to visit the reading room upstairs or check out the online catalog at our website, which, just in case you don't know, is hnoc.org. Like the Oxford American, we know the stories of the South are complex, shaded by many perspectives. In the next few days, New Orleans will experience a significant change. Our beloved newspaper, which celebrated its 175th anniversary last year, will go from publishing 7 days a week to just 3. It's hard to imagine the newspaper not on our doorstep every morning. It's hard for some of us to understand how a city like New Orleans can exist without a daily paper. While we each have our opinions on this matter, if you visit the Research Center, you'll understand that this change is not new, that it's not the first time in history that our news sources have been adjusted. But while we're still in the present, I'm honored to join the Oxford American, our panelists, and you to discuss the future of journalism in the South and the challenges we face to be a community of informed citizens in an ever-changing world of information. So now, help me welcome the recently elected representative from Little Rock, Arkansas, to the Arkansas legislature, and the Oxford American publisher, Warwick Sabin.
Terrific. Thank you, Priscilla, for that introduction, and thanks to everybody for being here. Before I continue with my remarks, I want to deviate from the program. I had mentioned to Priscilla that we wanted to take a moment of silence to respect the loss of someone who is dear to the New Orleans community. And Priscilla, since you knew Diana, I think you should say something.
We just want to have a moment of prayer for our dear friend Diana Pinkley, who passed away this week. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by, first of all, saying, it's always a pleasure for the Oxford American to be in New Orleans. This is a place that's dear to our hearts. A lot of our writers, I see Alex in the audience, are here with us today. And I'd like to also thank the Historic New Orleans Collection for hosting this event for us. We've done several events together in the past. We appreciate the partnership. And we also appreciate the sponsorship of Brigade Coffee. If those of you didn't have a chance to partake in their coffee, it's right outside this door. And we also appreciate the sponsorship of Entergy. And our board member, Patty Riddlebarger, is here. And we appreciate the connection with them and their support of the community here in New Orleans. Briefly, just to kind of put this in context, the Oxford American is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. And we had set our editorial calendar well in advance, as those of you in journalism can well imagine, and we were excited about celebrating what we call the New South journalism and all of the different changes and evolutions that are happening in the media industry. Of course, we could not have anticipated that among those changes this year would be I'd say, devastating blow to the media landscape here in New Orleans, making this city the largest metropolitan area in the United States without a daily newspaper. And so we had envisioned having a symposium to talk about the New South journalism, and that's what we're going to be doing here today. But of course, the occasion is bittersweet for us now. We'd even timed this event to happen at the end of September, well in advance of even knowing that October 1st would be the day that this momentous change would happen in New Orleans. And so with that in mind, again, we come here with great respect and honor the institution of the Times-Picayune, while at the same time obviously having to do what you all in New Orleans do so well, which is to dust yourself off and figure out how to move forward. And so that's why the panels are designed the way they are today, to talk about the reorganization of the Times-Picayune first, and then talk about the New South journalism landscape going forward. The other change we didn't anticipate this year was that we would be welcoming a new editor to the magazine. And that has happened within the last few weeks, and we're very pleased with the change and glad to welcome Roger Hodge to the Oxford American. He previously edited Harper's Magazine, and he was very kind to sort of step in and take on the role of moderator today for this symposium, and I have no doubt he will do an excellent job. And so I hope you'll join me in welcoming Roger Hodge.
Thanks, Warwick, and thank you all for coming. I'm really not going to say much up front, other than to introduce our panelists and get the ball rolling. We have a great panel here. Kim Bondy is an award-winning television executive, writer, and producer, and currently a media and marketing strategist. She's the founder of the Bondy Group, a firm that develops, produces, and markets media content. She's currently acting as executive producer of TV1's 2012 election coverage. She was at CNN and NBC News, and is a New Orleans native and longtime reader of the Times-Picayune. Nathaniel Rich is the author of 2 novels. Odds Against Tomorrow will be published by FSG in April, and The Mayor's Tongue. He contributes to the New York Times Magazine, most recently with a cover story on New Orleans, Harper's Magazine, the New York Review of Books, Rolling Stone, and the Oxford American. Alex Rawls is a former editor of Offbeat and the proprietor of MySpiltMilk.com, which covers New Orleans culture and anything else that interests him. He's also the guest editor of the Oxford American music issue on the music of New Orleans. I mean, not just New Orleans, all of Louisiana, which is in process now. In fact, today was the deadline for copy. And that'll be out in December.
Where's your story?
And Andrew Nelson rounds out our panel. He's a visiting professor at Loyola, New Orleans School of Mass Communication. He teaches social media. He writes for a number of magazines, including National Geographic Society's Traveler. And he has also been involved with the production of video games. So he has long experience with disruptive technologies. So we all know what's going on here with the Times-Picayune, but I guess I'd like to start off with Kim, and someone who actually learned to read. Who 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 learned to re staring at the Times-Picayune daily. And was it your father or your grandfather's newsstand?
It was actually my great-grandfather.
Your great-grandfather's.
Yeah.
So the question is, what is a newspaper for? What does it mean to have a daily newspaper, and what does it mean when suddenly you don't have one?
Well, I'll tell you, as a citizen of New Orleans and a person who's lived in a lot of different cities, I think it's important that you have a document or a journal of something that documents your daily lives, something that you can have real discourse with, something that you can take and walk around. I mean, I lived in New York City for a long time, and as a television producer who lived and worked in a building with all the same people who thought a lot like me and read all the same things like me, I would often get on the subways and the buses in New York City and just ride and watch people read the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the New York Post. But having grown up, and as Roger says, you know, I have this romantic notion of what the Times-Picayune is to me because my great-grandfather owned a newspaper stand near Turo Hospital. And so my earliest recollections of reading was reading the paper with him, because when his workers would, you know, drop the papers off and they would sort them in the middle of the night, and I would get to their house every morning, and we would, at 3 years old, I would drink coffee. You know, New Orleans, you could drink what lands in the saucer. We actually drank, you know, coffee in a cup with a saucer and whatever. And that's how I really learned to read at 3 years old, by reading the paper when there was a Times-Picayune in the States item. So for me, it is an emotional loss, but I could sort of see the writing on the wall, and I know we'll talk more about that.
Well, Nathaniel, you've been living here for 2 years now, but you also come from a big newspaper town, from New York City, and could you share your perspective on the daily and what this means for you and for everyone else who's used to having that paper show up in the morning?
Yeah, well, I was struck when I moved here at how central the paper was to the conversation, the conversation of the city, and I knew about the paper by its reputation. I knew it was this hallowed institution that had done some wonderful reporting up to in recent years, and I felt like when I moved here, I didn't subscribe immediately, but I felt like as soon as I did subscribe, I felt like it was my introduction to the city, and I felt for the first time that I was beginning to have an understanding of how the city worked and what people were talking about and what matters were important to the town. And I was really struck at just how, once I was reading it, how I felt not only informed, but I felt part of the civic life of the place. And I really sort of date my the moment at which I felt like I lived here from when I started subscribing to the paper. And you know, I've traveled around and I've been in a lot of cities, and I always read the local paper. I'm always fascinated by the local paper, and I was struck by, you know, I realized that the people who have lived here for a long time, you know, are very critical of a kind of decline in the quality of the paper over the years. But I have to say, even within the last couple of years, I was actually very impressed by the quality of the paper and by the comprehensiveness and the dedication to local issues, which you really don't see in a lot of local papers. I mean, there's a real strong sense of place and purpose to the Times-Pic, or there has been, that you don't see in papers of cities that are this size and much larger. I mean, it seemed like a really special paper, and so you know, I'm very disturbed by what's going on now.
So, Andrew, you and I talked a little bit the other day about the generational aspect of this, because you teach social media. So could you jump in with some of your observations about?
Yes, and the first thing I'd like to do, though, is to say something about the Times-Picayune. And my very first experience with it was I was staying at the house of some good friends of mine, and came down for coffee. And Sam was reading the paper, and he gave me a section of it. And I'd never seen the Times-Picayune before. He goes, "Read the obituaries." So I opened the obituary. Everybody knows. And there was an obituary to a panther. Somebody had put their pet leopard in the obituary section, and how could you not fall in love with a newspaper that would allow that or account for that in this wonderful way of looking at this mirror that is the mirror to New Orleans. It's just a fantastic thing, and it's going to be a real hard adjustment to make. But for me, it's going to be a hard adjustment, and I suspect for all of you. But in my social media class, I'll just leave you with this. When the paper was announced, when the publishing change was announced, a student of mine came running up to me and said, "Professor Nelson, is it really true that the Times-Picayune is going to stop publishing? That's wrong." And I said, "Well, it's going to stop publishing in print 4 days a week, but it'll still be online." And she kind of said, "Well, then what's the problem? I don't ever read it in print." So she was very confused by the reaction, which was very interesting to me. But I think one of the things that we're talking about here is it's a generational shift as well, and I think we have to remember that. I'm sure that there are more than a few people in the room who may not subscribe to the Times-Picayune. They read it every day. Either it's in their offices or their friends, but they actually will read NOLA.com online, even if it's always a bit of a mystery about what they do with it. So I do find that I'm seeing this is that younger people are pretty comfortable with this change. They don't have the newspaper reading tradition, print actually physically in the hand. I mean, today, coming here, I actually picked up a newspaper for the very first time in a long time, a copy of the Wall Street Journal. It was lying there at the hotel that I was at, and I picked it up and carried it out with me, thinking, God, it feels so good, though, to hold a newspaper. And for younger generations, that's just not what they connect with.
And Alex, as an online publisher, do you see this as an opportunity or more competition? How do you see this working out for you and for people like you?
Well, I mean, for me, it's good. I mean, in the sense that at least that a lot of people I think are about to now are going to be forced to have a more sort of robust online experience than they're accustomed to. That a lot of people who are accustomed to the idea of I read my paper, and if I'm not reading my paper, I'm reading the online equivalent of my paper. I think many are about to start discovering that there's a lot more to the world than just NOLA. And if a percentage of that discovers other independent digital news outlets, discovers My Spilt Milk, or discovers Uptown Messenger, or discovers The Lens, all for the better. I think there's a lot of people who are, I think one of the things we're about to have to do, whether we planned on it or not, is kind of break out of the monoculture notion that there is one voice in the city that you trust, and one voice that edits your news for you and decides what you need to know. And so I think people are now about to have to discover that there are a lot of voices out there and a lot of voices worth paying attention to. And if just even a fragment of those regular NOLA readers start reading around and reading around more actively, I think that's going to be good for all of us.
And by the way, feel free to jump in if you have comments. You don't have to respond to direct questions, please. But could someone address this notion of the fragmentation of the readership? Because if everyone's just going online and finding the thing that appeals to them most immediately, and people aren't having a shared readership experience, what does that do to the civic life of a city? Andrew?
Well, I don't know. Maybe this is my view, but when people would get a physical newspaper, there are lots of people, we all have friends, who just throw everything away and just look at the sports section. Or they'll just go right to the society pages in the debutante season and read Nell Nolan and ignore everything else. So, you know, we've already had a fragmented sort of consumption of news. I think one of the other issues that we'll have to bring up too, which is the question of not just are we having many voices, is who can get on and read these voices, because what we have too in New Orleans is a great majority of people who are unwired. So they're not on, and it's a big concern as well. So one of the problems that this community faces is how do we, if we have to accept the fact that this is the way newspaper businesses are going, businesses that run newspapers are putting them all online, how do we ensure that the large groups of people who used to be able to go get the newspaper now can be able to get online and read it? And there's no easy answer to that, but this is something that we have to keep raising. Some sort of, and I don't know what it would be, either a tax or something to help, or a subsidy to help get people on. Look, if anybody doesn't think that this is needed, and just go to a library and wait in line. There are so many people, and I see a few heads nodding. I mean, when you go into libraries now, especially New Orleans public libraries, there's a huge long line of people who can't afford computers and can't afford digital access, waiting to get on and just use this and use it to look for jobs, to connect, to find information. So it's something that we're going to have to figure out as a community about how we're going to do it.
I completely agree with that. You know, I think what bothers me most is it seems like there was a lack of a plan or a real strategy here, aside from the economics, because you know, you're right, a third of the people in the city are not wired. You know, my grandmother, who, you know, reads the paper every day, held an iPad for the first time during, you know, Hurricane Isaac. She has never been on a computer in her life, but she buys the paper, you know, every day. And then there's just sort of the recording of our lives that just won't happen in a way that it did before. I remember in the 2 years after Katrina, I lived away during Katrina. I had a home here, so I've always been connected to the city, but I had a house here, and my house was badly flooded, and I was on the air with CNN, so like I was reporting the story, and I was a story at the same time, and was very connected to, became really connected to the city, and decided to move home and subscribe to the paper immediately. And in the months, I would say, starting in maybe like late 2006 and 2007, I was struck by how big the obituary section of the paper was. Now, is that just about people writing obituaries for their, you know, pet panther? No, but it was really, what it was saying was how many people were actually dying. Like when you read the stories, how many people were actually dying post-Katrina from strokes, you know, the stress of their lives, heart attacks. I mean, young people, you know, not just old people, people who had moved away to other places but were, you know, coming back home to be buried. And I don't know that you'll get a sense of that anymore. And then somebody joked, where this was happening in another city, where, you know, if you read the obits, you might miss a funeral of a friend or a loved one if you're not digitally connected, because you don't have that every day, you know, picking up the paper. So there are a lot of emotional touchstones to this, or, you know. But also the other side of it is, when I first read that this was going to happen, and I learned via Twitter right about the same time as the reporters at the Times-Picayune did. Don't get me started on that. Yeah. Bad management. But and irony at its best. But, you know, also too. Oh, where was I going with that? I lost my thought. I had a really good thought. I'll come back to it.
Okay.
Oh, I was saying, what could you actually have delivered to your house of quality for $1? So I kind of get that the economics of it, of, you know, actually printing a paper, the high cost of print and paper and the machines, and you know much more about these kinds of things than I do, but I know the cost of television, producing a television show, is really, really expensive. And just like most networks would love to get out of the box and be able to go digitally. There's something that about television and about a newspaper that creates an event that drives the rest of their coverage, even if it comes at a very high cost. And I think it's like the New York Times spends about $1,000 per subscriber to get that paper to someone's home. I don't know what it costs at Times-Picayune, but I read somewhere that the real cost of the paper should have been about $3 a paper, and I feel like we didn't even get the opportunity with them as a, working in the public trust, to have that discourse with them about what we could have done to save the physicalness of this paper as a community. And now what you've done is disenfranchised, gutted your staff, and refused to sell the paper. Something that, we had I'd had an adversarial and a romantic love relationship with for all of my life, but the city did for 175 years. And I think that in many ways it was just really very poorly handled, and the people of New Orleans didn't get a real say.
And the website is dreadful. So I'm okay. I see. Does everybody think that? I mean, you talk about as a businesswoman, you know that you have to have a business plan. But where has it been written that if you're going to cut publishing a newspaper 7 days a week, that you then put your readership, or you give them, I guess, something that you, for example, that wonderful expose on prisons, you can even find online. So the problem that I have, and I think a lot of people do, if you live in a digital world, and we can accept the fact that there are a lot of people, as I said, younger generations, but there's no reason that you can't have something that's curated, that's lively, that is full of voice, and that is not NOLA.com. I mean, that's just handed somebody like Alex a great business opportunity right here, as you said, and I'm sure you're going to take advantage of it.
Yes.
But again, I think that's one of the mysteries of advanced publications, of why they did what they did. The other thing to point out, and I think that here in New Orleans, it's an amazing city that is so passionate about its journalism, is that there's now an entire state that's about to undergo a giant experiment, and that's Alabama. So the Birmingham News, the Huntsville Times, and the Mobile Register are all going on a 3-day publishing schedule, because they're also owned by the Newhouse chain. So what's it going to mean for an entire state? We still have the Baton Rouge Advocate, and I understand they're quite interested in New Orleans all of a sudden. So I'm sure I've heard a few people picking up. I'm just curious, how many people here are now subscribing to the Baton Rouge Advocate? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It says here that they have, as of last week, 2,000 subscribers, up from 1,000 2 weeks ago. That's without any benefit of local advertising.
Wow. Well, yeah, it's a great opportunity. But I think there's something to be said. There's when an entire state, the state of Alabama, will no longer have a regular published newspaper in its 3 top metros. What is that going to mean for politics, for economic news? Fascinating. It's in a way we're being thrust into this fascinating yet terrifying world where we don't really know the outcome yet. It's just going to be.
Yeah, I think New Orleanians have a healthy skepticism and cynicism about everything. Yeah, any kind of institutions of power, and I think there are two reasons that any thinking person in New Orleans knew right from the get-go that the plans of advanced publications were that they were being dishonest in their stated goal of improving journalism by enhancing this online experience and making the website a better medium for news than the daily paper. One is the website's garbage. Obviously, we've seen that which to me says they haven't spent money on it. And the second thing is they fired a bunch of journalists, including some of them of the highest standing on the paper. So I think right then we know we're dealing with a a sort of blatantly, plainly dishonest enterprise. And so I think for a community that is especially sensitive and skeptical about pronouncements from you know, establishments and figures on high, I think this everyone saw through this instantly.
Yeah. You know what's interesting about that is what you also, you know, lack now is a real checks and balances, because if you print something, right, there is a physical walking around record, whether it's a mistake or, you know, intentional or otherwise. So much of what happens, you know, I'll watch NOLA.com throughout the day for whatever it is, and stories come and go. They get corrected, you know, and so you can actually lose track of where they are in their reporting, because they're, you know, it doesn't, I mean, you know, obviously your digital footprint lasts forever, but how many people really are going to sign up for that? So I also think that, you know, they're really largely now going to be in the business of producing content and not real reporting or storytelling.
I think one of the anxieties I think that comes out of the lack of a paper is partially the sense that for a long time, whether you read the paper or not, you feel like the paper documents our lives, our civic life.
Right.
And even if you didn't actually read it, you knew that someone out there was, and that someone was writing down what was happening to this community. And, you know, and obviously in ways, you know, the web is going to be, you know, sustained longer than newsprint, but the sense that it was physical gave it a certain value. And I think, you know, for New Orleanians, it's particularly problematic, and for some of the reasons you touched on, because, again, whether you're reading the paper or not, the sense that there is a watchdog out there, and someone is paying attention, is to what people are doing, and especially to what city government is doing, is particularly valuable. And, you know, I think what you touched on, Andrew, about Alabama, the premise that if the news is only coming out every 3 days in print, that makes you, it's at least uneasy. Right. And I mean, theoretically, the paper will continue online to cover the same stories, but so far the shortcomings of the platform give you reason to doubt what you're about to read, and their ability to actually fulfill that function. Actually, it was funny, while we've been talking, I've been trying to load the NOLA.com app, which they updated yesterday, I assume because the iPhone updated its operating system and it's yet to load. So while the icon now includes TP, that it can't actually read the TP yet. So the fragility of their delivery so far as an online entity gives you reason to worry about, are they going to be able to continue to perform the functions that we expect from a paper, whether we read it or not. I think that a paper obviously has a role in the city beyond simply how we individually consume it.
Well, the other thing I think, and we can point to that there are, in defense of digital journalism, I do think that there are ways to do it correctly. I think the New York Times, for example, is people are probably familiar with their homepage or their coverage. I think it's only been enhanced. I think it's a deep and rich experience. I just noticed yesterday that the Washington Post killed their much maligned website and have come up with a redesign there, which is easier to read. I wish somebody would get the hint down here. Where are they now? They're over in where's NOLA.com located now? Didn't they move out of the TP building?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. So they're still up there. So somebody
Going to Canal Place.
Canal Place. So maybe, you know, up there in Canal Place, they can like take a look at these and really come up with a website that's not just dynamic, because we're all, you know, we don't need sometimes dynamism in web pages, but just telling us what's important in a way that we know visually. When you read a newspaper, of course, you're taught how to read it. One of the great pleasures of the old TP was the ability to figure out what was important to editors, or the ability, for example, to, you know, look at the Wall Street Journal and always know they're going to have that funny little story in about the third column. So, you know, there's a consistency that you can teach, I think, with digital. You can teach people how to look at it, how to read it. And that goes, I think, a bit of a way to make people feel a little less anxious about losing the physical paper. Again, the other issue, and I've heard other journalists talking about this in the last couple of months, is maybe the ability to come up with something that's totally, maybe once a week, you can have a 24/7 content generating website, but what you can have at the end of the week is analysis, in-depth analysis that may arrive on your doorstep as a magazine. I mean, the interesting thing too to look at, I think, is we're also worried about newspapers, and newspapers are really having a very hard time of it in this new digital environment, but a lot of magazines seem to be thriving, and I think, you know, we know of one right now. So, you know, who sponsored this panel. So again, I don't know if it's exactly print versus digital at this point, but I do I'm a strong believer in the fact that I think you can get people reading and interacting and actually liking a digital website. It just has to be done much, much better than what they're doing at NOLA.com. Oh, there's a question. I think the New York Times, the Times. I think the Washington Post is making a stab. I think there's even smaller papers I've seen that have done really well. The Las Vegas, is it the Sun? Yeah, it seems to be that the Newhouse chain has some sort of template that they impose. So if you've gone to has anybody seen the Ann Arbor paper, which is where they try? Yeah, yeah. So it looks all the same. It becomes like a Egg McMuffin. And you're not. I mean, New Orleans is not an Egg McMuffin. God, if anything.
Yeah.
It's just an insult.
To me, I think it comes down to a question of money, and what I see is that they're not investing in it. I might be wrong. I have no idea what the internal, you know, finances are of the paper and the kinds of decisions they're making. But when you're using a template that's used by other papers owned by the same conglomerate, and you're not putting much thought into it, and it's slapdash, what that tells me is that they're not spending money, which makes sense from what we know about the paper, which is that they're desperate not to lose money, and they're trying to you know, save money, and they're firing people, and so it's not surprising that they're not doubling down on investing in the website.
Go ahead.
But it shows, and I'm not confident that they realize yet that this is something they're going to have to really invest in and dedicate more time to. I mean, I think they've heard the complaints, but I still don't feel that they get it, or they're capable of
I want to put this to the business people on this panel who are absolutely, you know, involved in making communications companies happen or publish online. What are these guys thinking? You're alienating your customer base. You're cutting back on your ability to create your product. What is this? It's crazy. Is this a plan?
Yes.
For you. Yeah.
I assume it's a plan. Yes, I have no idea. Obviously, I think they foresee this as a viable future. Whether or not this is the best way to get there, that doesn't seem like it to me.
And the paper was making money. We should
right.
say that.
I mean, right. You know, the paper was, well, yes. I mean, we know at least it was well read. That whether it was going to continue to make money, whether we were going to have to live through the slow erosion or not, obviously we're not going to get to find that out. We're just going to jump forward. The thing I find disappointing at this stage is that it simply is not very good digital journalism right now. I'm always struck. I mean, I actually believe Warwick, in his essay in the introduction to this issue, talks about the potential of digital journalism. And when I do a piece, that at least a half an hour or longer is spent on thinking through, what do I want to link to? What do I want to embed? How can I make reading a story a more involved experience? If all you do is read the 10 paragraphs or so that I lay out, cool. If you want to go farther, I'm trying to give you something so you can actually find out more, so you can so it can actually be a more complete and hopefully a more complex experience. Memory serves pretty much what NOLA.com links to is later NOLA.com stories.
Right.
And
well, it's not being a good web citizen because it's not linking out, which is the essence of the web is linking. And pushing out and making those connections. So this brings up a question, and I don't want to interrupt the train of thought about explaining how to do it better. But the other question is, which I hope we can loop around to, is what does a business, because a newspaper is a business, what does it owe its community? So it's a question of good web citizenship, but it's also a question of good citizenship in general. So please continue talking about how you connect with these other, Alex, these other websites and other online content.
Well, I mean, for me personally, my attitude is, I think it's good business. The more I link around, first off, the more people become aware I'm out there, and that's good for me. And also, my philosophy is essentially I am a point of view, and I want people to read it, but I want people to also see other points of view, what other people are saying. I'm not writing the last word on any particular subject, and so I want people to know what all is out there, which just sort of seems sort of fundamentally democratic to me. But on the other hand, one thing that's different between me and the paper is that I'm not the website of record, or I'm not historically treated as the website of record. And I'm not sure that, the paper, I'm not sure what the paper owes people. I mean, I know what I would like from it, and I know what I feel like I have invested in it. And I think that level of investment that we have is a major part of this story, because to some extent, I think one of the reasons this is also painful is because we did our part. We bought the paper, right. We read the paper, we subscribed to the paper. And so we did our part, and they changed. And understandably,
without us having a say.
Without us having a say.
Right.
Now, the one thing I've been thinking about is, as we all sort of say, why won't they sell? Why won't they do something different? And I wonder, would we say this to any other business? Do we go to another business and say, no, I like paying this amount for my dinner. No, you can't raise dinner prices $1.50. Does any other business, do we feel like other businesses owe us something?
I think some do, but I think that media,
well, they also win.
Yes, I know, right?
But I think that if you make a business off of freedom of speech, and if you are going to build a public trust of 175 years that you are a paper of record,
absolutely.
Then you absolutely owe us that good business. And what I can't figure out, if this was about economics, why didn't they sell? Especially while the paper was really worth something. Now, it's sort of like you would be buying what? And if there was a real digital strategy, it should have been reflected. We should have been like, well, oh my goodness, I barely pick up the paper now because, I read everything online. And I don't think anyone in this room can say that they've advanced the cause of journalism or digital media in that way. So I'm really at a loss for what the real strategy is. But I do think that they owe us. And if you didn't want to be in this business, in the business that we have been in, then I think you should have said to a Warren Buffett or a Tom Benson or someone else who said, I'm interested in buying this paper, then let's have that discussion before it becomes about just a building and some basic infrastructure, because I don't know now what it's really going to be worth to anyone who might still be interested in the paper.
And I just want to jump in. I forgot to mention earlier to call your attention to these question cards that were placed on everyone's seats. So if you would fill out questions They'll be collected, and we'll move to a question session in just a bit.
I just wanted to respond to that. I mean, I respect that view. I have to say but I don't share this feeling that the paper owes us anything. But I do feel that the degree to which a paper is responsive to the community and is involved in the community correlates with the quality of the paper. So I feel like what you're seeing now is the quality declining and people losing interest and becoming frustrated because the paper itself is basically losing interest in the community. And so I think it's a question of, they're sort of intrinsically related, and the better papers are those that are more involved and more responsive to the community, and that's where the quality of a newspaper comes from.
You know, the other thing too that seems really funny to me about the entire affair here is how we've not heard so much from the owners. We have not heard any attempt for them to explain their strategy or what they're trying to do, not even a public relations campaign. Although I do hear that there's going to be an advertising campaign convincing people that the Times-Picayune is worth reading again.
Where will they be advertising is the question.
Yeah.
Well, they're also launching an advertising campaign in Baton Rouge for the new Baton Rouge.
Right, that's the other thing.
The height of irony is that they're actually, it appears, investing in reporters and opening an office in Baton Rouge just in some kind of dispute with the Advocate. Whereas, you know, they're firing New Orleans journalists to hire Baton Rouge journalists.
And where's the business sense in that? I mean, okay, you live in Baton Rouge and you're going to subscribe to a paper that will only appear 3 days a week, when you have, you know, the Advocate who's there 7 days a week and is your local paper anyway. It makes no sense. It's a complete mystery. So, I don't know, and the mystery is a mystery, like, to me. I don't even know why. You know, is this some sort of nefarious marketing campaign or a PR campaign? I just don't know.
I can't quite figure out. I'm saying, what's this? So when they announce it, the Manship family announces, okay, well, fine, we're going to help fill the void. And there have been a number of, we were talking about linking to other sources and websites as I was reading around last night on this. And, you know, a lot of people had really great questions for, you know, how is, you know, Baton Rouge and New Orleans, you know, it's 72 miles, it might as well be 7,200 miles, right? In a lot of ways. And, you know, editorially, what is that really going to look like? And if the paper has to take an editorial position on something, New Orleans versus Baton Rouge, how does that really, you know, sort of play out? So, you know, to open up, you know, for the Manships to say, okay, fine, and they have their I looked at it, their New Orleans page, I looked at it, you know, a couple of times, and it's fine. You know, it's a little pedestrian, but that's fine, they're trying. And then for the Times-Picayune folks, you know, for Newhouse, whatever the new what is the new it's a new company starting on October 1st, but what happens to I don't know, I'm a little at a loss for what. Yeah, it really is. It's sort of like, I feel like, you know, maybe this is, like, we're either being punked or this is just like some really bad lack of anything, sort of a strategy. I don't know.
Well, and I think I would just one thing which points out, you know, one of the benefits of competition, which is somebody, what you're saying, we don't know what's going on. You know, traditionally when we have these questions, we turn to our newspaper. You know, we want to get that big series that's going to explain or take all these complexities and put them in and introduce informational graphics, and then have people do all of this diligent reporting, and, you know, journalists really get in and look at it. That's the other, one of the things that I have a big issue with is this whole notion of content and what content is. It seems to be an umbrella term that can embrace anything, and I think that's really wrong. At Loyola, what we want to do with social media is we actually want to get away from content and teach. You have to teach students, journalism students, that how to be digital, but you still have to be a journalist, which means you have to know ethics. It means you have to know how to write. I mean, the technology, there's going to be new technology that's coming down the pike all the time. It's Twitter now, and well, maybe not Facebook. Look at what's happening to their stock price. But
Instagram.
But you need to be able to communicate as students, as people in a community. We need to be able to know how to talk to each other in a way that is going to, promote discussion and not tear it down. So, yeah, I really do think that this is where I'm looking forward to all of these new voices that are coming up. Alex's website, Gambit, is coming in to fill the fold. We have the Uptown Messenger and the Lens. So this is what's really, let's see if that happens. But right now it's a real problem for us because we don't have a competitor to this new entity, NOLA.com.
Well, I think it would be a good time to start collecting the question cards. Pass it down to the...
I wanted to add to what you were saying about I think there are a lot of really great opportunities. I come from traditional media, having spent a bulk of my career at CNN and at NBC News. And when we got into the digital business both at NBC and then when I got to CNN, which has, one of the most, I think it's the most visited news website in the world still, I think. But it gave journalists, traditional, journalists who were, a lot of them who had come from newspaper background at some point or print background somewhere in their career and had become TV journalists, it gave them a great outlet to actually do their full reporting. If you are a reporter at NBC News, let's say, and you do a piece for NBC Nightly News, it's probably going to run about 1:45, 3 tracks, 2 sound bites, and a stand-up. It's a very traditional model of storytelling. A feature piece might be, 2.5 minutes. You can sort of, you can raise a lot of questions and you can point to a lot of issues and you can do some very solid journalism. I'm not knocking, the hand that feeds me, but what the digital platform has done is to be able to say, and now here is all of my reporting on this subject, and that part of it is fantastic because you're not limited to ink and paper. You're not listening. You're not limited to TV time. I mean, you are only going to have. I've produced a lot of TV in my life, and at the end of the day, you're always you're gonna just run out of time. So that's the good side of it. But you still have to have journalists do this work, and not just content producers, people who are putting press releases on a website. Right.
That's not journalism. Right. A press release uploaded to a website is not journalism. You really need people to analyze, and that's what you have to. That's what we try to teach our students. So,
this taps into something that Nathaniel said a minute ago, that that the sense that your newspaper is responsive to you, and I think from what I've read and people I know at NOLA, that part of the plan of this is to actually make this in ways more responsive to the community. But one of the questions is the nature of that response, which I think also matters. There was a piece that Romanesco published recently. It was a memo that was sent out at the Oregonian, and since then, which is another advanced publication or I guess entity, and I gather since then they've sort of tried to back away from it to some extent. But it walked through the theoretical day of a theoretical writer, and essentially your day was largely spent tweeting what you're going to do something, tweet about what you just did, write a story based on the interview you just did, maybe tweet out what should I ask next person, and essentially sort of crowdsourcing your stories. And there's a point at which does that sound like journalism? There are parts of it. There's no question. There's value in some of that. But there's a good chance if you do one interview and then take that to print, that's going to essentially start the narrative. Whether the person you talk to is actually right or not. Somebody you talk to first feels hard done by, feels like they're being screwed, and if you take that to print, everything after that is going to be something that's going to say, they felt screwed. Here's somebody who says, no, we didn't really screw them. And someone else jumps in to say, yes, they did. But it all becomes based on the premise that person A got screwed, when person A may be a wacko and person B may have been right. So there's a whole sort of rush to produce.
Yeah.
that's theoretically a part of the model, and it may, and they say they've tried to back away from it, and so we don't know if that's going to apply to NOLA or not. But it's something that is floating in the advanced system, and again, it kind of gives us reason to be nervous as we move forward.
Yeah, and it's also, when you talk about responsiveness to the community, it's not only the nature of the response, but it's also the nature of the community. I mean, there's a very large percentage of the population here, as well as the readership of the Times-Pic, that doesn't have access to the internet. So by going online and not having daily paper, you're not being responsive to that segment of the population that you could argue needs the paper the most.
So I think we'll go to a few questions here, and then we'll take a break before the next panel. Here's a question which directly connects to what you just said, Nathaniel, which is to address, please address the crucial role and responsibility of the Fourth Estate to protect democracy. And this speaks to the fear factor. A politician didn't want to appear on the front page of the Times-Picayune with an unflattering story about some corruption or misconduct. How can this role be filled going forward?
Well, I think it's devastating in that regard, because there's in the city there's more need than in many places in America to have a very strong, rigorous journalistic community that is really questioning how things are done in the institutions in this town. And it's a tragedy. And I think that yes, you can have a strong, robust digital newspaper, but there's nothing in the way that the Times-Pic has gone about this that gives me any faith that they're going to be that newspaper.
And I don't think it might necessarily be NOLA.com anymore. I know that Steve Beatty in the Lens, his group at the Lens, is doing great work, great investigative work, and I think we're still going to have it. I don't. What worries me is the future. I guess future journalists who are coming up in this world, that they do think, or they are taught, that what journalism is tweeting what you had for breakfast, or what your source had for breakfast. That's not journalism.
No. I'm actually, in the short term, this is a normal anxiety, but I think in the long term that whether the web and web-oriented journalism is still going to serve this function. That because you are still going to have people who want to tell stories, and while there are people who are going to be satisfied with tweeting out a version of a story and sort of maintain that cycle, there are going to be people who want to actually tell stories for real, just as there always have been and just as there are now. And as you have people, that Andrew's students, certainly, people I know who similarly have never had any kind of primary relationship with a newspaper, and whose main media outlets have always been online. They're still serious too. And they're going to similarly, when they want it, that they'll be following news, and there will be a point where being shamed in print, or online, has the same effect as being shamed in print. So in the long run, this isn't necessarily one of my great anxieties.
But there is something, about holding that imagery. I mean, we saw it, and we all see it in TV shows and in movies, where somebody drops the pile of newspapers with the headline splashed across the front, and then you hold on to it. And I was, if I wasn't doing a million different things last night, one of the things that I wanted to do was actually to go through some boxes that I have of newspaper headlines that I have kept, over the years, because there is something about that, whether it's in shame, and that was what I was talking about earlier. I mean, this does not have the same effect. And first of all, a picture of a po' boy, don't get me started. 5 tempting supersize dishes to try. Swing dancers fly high to live jazz this weekend.
It's an embarrassment for the city. I mean,
That's really, and that's what's above the fold, if you
Is
will,
there
right?
swing dancers flying high?
That, yeah, right, no.
Not on the website.
Those are, what I just read to you, that's above, this is above, that's above the fold. And so, you know.
No, I was gonna, I'm sorry, Alex.
Anyway, but you know, while we look at this, and on one hand, there's clearly is the power of like seeing it in print. But on the other hand, because digital, it can go so much faster and go so much farther into people who aren't necessarily buying the paper or who aren't even in the city. That the potential for ultimately holding someone up and someone responsible for what they're doing, that there's a lot of potential for that. So, you know, we have to question how much of it's tied to the physical entity and how much of it's tied to our associations with the physical.
And that's what we were talking about. Actually, it's part of it is we're talking about two different things, really, in some ways, because we're talking about the loss of the physical paper. Okay, that's one thing, but we're also talking about the gutting of good reporting, because. And I read all the other digitals, and I love it. And that's really primarily where I get my news. But there is something to watching a story, something about slowing you down in your reporting that doesn't always happen in a digital platform. We talk about being able to get it on.
It's having a good editor, who's actually.
And sometimes you have to watch. Just like part of why I wanted to come home is not that I wanted to come home and, as a matter of fact, CNN asked me if I wanted to come home and run their New Orleans bureau, and I was like, actually, I want to go home and watch. I want to watch what happens. I want to be a part of the citizen reporting on on the rebuilding of our city. And I think part of what we miss in some of the digital, it's going to be that. It's going to be like, you need to get that on Twitter or something immediately versus having a day that has to go by. Because there are many stories that we walk into in a newsroom at 8 o'clock in the morning that don't even make it on air because the full reporting, and I teach journalism as well, and sometimes I tell my students that sometimes being a good reporter, and actually all the time, and especially when it comes to investigative reporting, is being willing to, at the end of that day, of that story, saying there's no story here. And I think that's one of the issues that happens in this new day.
Sorry, that's when I'm unless you read a different TP than I did, the TP has not always been a golden newspaper. That during football season, it really doesn't much matter if Drew Brees says anything. It's going to be the Saints are the lead story. Drew Brees after week 2 saying we'll do better this week. It was front page, not just above the fold. It was his picture, and it was the lead story. So, and there was, unless we'll do better counts as news, that was pretty soft. And
I agree with you on that. Yeah.
So I think while we want to say journalism coming up is about to suck, and journalism, the way we've lived it, is the golden age. I think there's been ultimately that the future is going to come down to the actual journalists themselves. That you are going to there have always been hacks. There are hacks. There will be hacks, and there have always been people who've taken the business seriously, taken the task as an actual sort of a trust. They existed, they exist, and they will exist.
Well, here's a question that kind of addresses this, which is, can someone speculate? Try to imagine what the New Orleans media landscape might be in 5 years. And
good question.
What would we like to happen?
I think to tie this into the last subject of conversation, one thing that is important not to lose sight of is that it's one thing to have a platform for investigative journalism, but the other aspect is that investigative journalism, serious journalism, costs money, a lot of money, and so you need to. I think what's going to happen to here, and I think more broadly in the industry, and you see it happening already, is that nonprofit organizations are going to come forward and start to either take ownership of these publications or start their own institutions, and it's going to become increasingly seen as a public service. And I think what will happen, and since the Times-Pic made these announcements, there has actually been a lot of investment in other forms of journalism here, radio journalism, other and blogs and so on. And I think in 5 years, I think hopefully we will have several robust journalistic organizations that probably will be running on a different business model, which is that they won't be capitalist enterprises; they will be endowed.
Well,
I'm just gonna. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that that's probably where it's headed. But I would also add too that we will have at a very micro level bloggers, or the Uptown Messenger is a very good example of some an outlet. If you live uptown, you'll know when the next boutique shop is opening, because that becomes the front page news of the Uptown Messenger, because that is their audience. But I think that we'll see a lot of more micro reporting, and I hope we see a lot of micro reporting. I also hope that what we see is some group publishing arm coming together to create stories that are analytical, that are investigative, that talk about what the culture of the city in broader ways, and reaches out, and I hope it appears in print. I don't think magazines are going away. I work for National Geographic. We have great magazines. They're still strongly committed to them, and everything that the publishers say is that so are readers. So maybe what we're talking about, maybe the physical daily newspaper has ceased to exist, but you will still have that wonderful moment where you can sit down, not with an iPad, but thumb through stories and read stories that appeal to you, that are about your community, that you can still enjoy in the sitting in your favorite armchair. And I don't think that's going to disappear. And all beautiful photographs and art. We forget there's an art to newspapers as well. And I'm sad to see that go. There's new things happening, but again, magazines will still be there. I think we'll have that idea of micro blogs, and then investigative online arms as well. It's going to be very exciting. We should feel sad that the TP is going away, but really look forward to all the voices that we're going to be able to have access to in the future.
Well, on that note, I think maybe we should begin to draw this to a close. Warwick, our publisher, the publisher of the Oxford American, has a few things he wants to say before we break for the next session, and then we will continue the conversation at 11:45 with our next panel. Warwick?
I'm sorry that we're taking the break, but we have another great panel coming up here in about 15 minutes, and I hope everybody's going to stay, and we obviously want to thank our panelists very much, so thank you. I just really had three quick housekeeping things I wanted to mention. The first thing, as many of you I see have come to realize, we have copies of our New South Journalism issue outside the room, and they're free to take, and we hope you will. And I wanted to point out that the Chris Rose piece in there obviously deals with this issue directly, and we also talk about the events in Alabama that were brought up. And so, and for everybody who's watching this on the live stream over the internet, hopefully around the world, go to oxfordamerican.org and you can find this issue, the New South Journalism issue. Secondly, and most importantly, we have a representative of -30-, the Times-Picayune Employment Assistance Fund, outside the room taking donations to help the employees. And I know that there's a form that they have that you can fill out and just leave with them. I think that we can put your credit card number or leave a check, but we definitely hope that you'll support the employees who, I guess, are having their last day of work at the newspaper today. So please do that. And in relation to that as well, tomorrow night from 6 to 9 p.m. at the Howlin' Wolf on South Peters Street here in New Orleans, there's a fundraiser for the staff members of the paper who've been laid off, and it's called Black, White, Red All Over. Finally, we are sponsoring a lunch at the Hotel Monteleone after the symposium. It begins at 1 p.m. at the restaurant Criollo, and there's a special prefix menu. We hope you'll join us there. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll be right back with the next panel. Thank you.
It's a really complex, multiple issue.